Good morning.
I think we'll wait maybe two or three more minutes just to see if anybody else will hop on, and then we can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Good morning.
Happy
Good
rainy
morning.
morning.
While you're sitting there thinking, I want you to be thinking about your earliest experiences with your family, with composting or growing food. And the reason Erin and I were just talking about this was because when I saw Seema's presentation, I was so touched by her description about her grandparents and the influence that they had on her. So think about that. Maybe we can share just a little bit before we get started. If you can drop it into the chat, that would be another thing that you could do, so we could see over there what you're thinking, what you remember.
Well, my granddad was a big gardener, and he was from a small town in West Tennessee, and but he got pulled into the Navy. He wanted to study to become a doctor, but you know, a garden, and I just remember in his retirement, he grew a wonderful garden in his backyard and would always bring us vegetables. And so I'm eager. We have compost, but I know we can always improve that practice. I'm really excited to learn this morning.
Well, I hope.
We always
Go ahead.
We always had fruit growing up in a big grapevine, and we made grape juice and jam and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Did you use your feet to stomp the grapes, Dan?
I don't think so.
We actually made some Scuppernine wine one time with our family. We kids did stomp the grapes.
Oh my.
I grew up on farms in Kentucky, and we always had a huge garden, but we didn't compost. I don't know why, but I mean, it just wasn't something that they did. My grandmother, my parents, whatever. But I've always been a planter and grower wherever I am. But now I'm in a condo, and I have like 2 square inches, but I still have it loaded with vegetables and plants. But I can't compost. There's just no way. I've got a patio out back and just a little area tiny in the front. So
well, I'm going to give you some ideas about what you can do, Bonnie, with your compost. I hope anyway. So
yeah.
Okay.
And since I don't cook anymore, I just really don't have much left over. There's that too.
I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for everyone who's already shared. And feel free to keep sharing in the chat as well. And if you also want to share like who you are and where you're coming from, feel free to do that as well. But thank you so much for joining us this morning for a workshop on doing more with composting. This workshop is brought to you by the Nashville chapter of Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light, and it's one of the final events for this year's Faith Climate Action Week. And so I'm so thankful that y'all could join us. My name is Erin Perry, and I am currently an intern working with Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light. This morning, I would like to welcome Karen McIntyre, the librarian at Westmeade Elementary School in Nashville. Karen brings 20 years of library experience to her gifts for helping people recognize, share, and appreciate the value of their life story as revealed in literature, which we've already done a little bit this morning. Her personal commitments to health, wholeness, and sustainability are evident in her involvement in food security, school gardening, recycling, and environmental organizations in her community. Karen is responsible for starting composting and garden initiatives at Westmeade Elementary, which is a part of what she'll share with us today. So just a few reminders before I turn it over to Karen. There will be a Q&A with Karen at the end of the session. So feel free to send any questions you might have throughout the workshop just in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of her presentation. Don't forget to stay muted throughout the workshop. If you get muted, I'm so sorry. We just want to make sure that we can hear Karen's voice But then also we will be recording this workshop to share later. So if you feel uncomfortable with your video being shared, feel free to turn your camera off throughout the workshop just so you feel more comfortable. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm so excited to be here with y'all. And thank you so much for Karen for being here this morning as well. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Karen.
Okay, before we start the slideshow, Erin, you know, I wouldn't be a librarian if I didn't start with a story, right? And in all different cultures, there's always a trickster. In the Southwest, coyote is a trickster in the Native American tales. And some of the Native Americans have rabbit as a trickster. Well, in the Middle East, the trickster is Nasrudin. And this is a Nasrudin tale. It's very brief, but it encompasses the way I feel about my life, really. Nasrudin was practicing Comanche. Now, Comanche is kind of like a cross between a lute and a viola. So it has a bow, it's played with a bow. And he was in the living room practicing Comanche, and his wife was in the kitchen cooking. And she was getting very frustrated because this is the way it sounded. He sounded just like this. And she came out of the kitchen and said, Nasrudin, why? Why do you play Comanche like that? All of the other men in the village play all up and down the fretboard. You play that one note. Why? Nasrudin looked at her calmly and said, it's because they are all looking for this note. And sometimes I think that's the way it is if you've been a long time supporter of environmental causes. We have one note and we keep singing it as loudly as we can to get everyone's attention so that they can focus on doing the right thing for our world. So I wanted to start with that little story. That's one of my favorites. Okay, if you want to put up the slides, we'll start with those now. And I put this up because Urban Green Lab, if you don't know them, has been so supportive. They educate so many people about sustainability and environmental issues in our community, and they work with the schools. And this is a comment for Earth Day from their leader, Todd Lawrence. He says, we're commemorating Earth Day this year by celebrating all those who take the extra step to restore our Earth in the simplest of ways. And I want to celebrate you because all of us, all of you do that every day. And it's what has made us come to the point where we are almost ready to make these giant leaps that we have to make if we're going to survive. Okay, Erin. And I was thinking about my own awakening. Of course, I've been involved in environmentalism all my life. But in the last decade or two, I've become more aware, as I'm sure you have too. And in about 2002, I read Barbara Kingsolver's book, Small Wonders. And in it, it's a wonderful book of essays. In fact, I read this in a Sunday school class downstairs at West End and was so impressed because I'd only read her fiction at that point. But in this particular book, she talks about the cost of eating non-seasonally, of transporting food from all over the world to our tables, in terms of the carbon, in terms of the cost. And then about 5 years later, she wrote Animal Vegetable Miracle, which is a chronicle of a year in her life when she tries to truly live by those concepts of being sustainable and seasonal. And it has wonderful recipes in it besides. So I tried to start doing that in my life as well. And then in the past few years, probably the most instructive piece that I've read was Douglas Tallama's first book, which was Bringing Nature Home. And this is his second book, Nature's Best Hope, which is a wonderful book. But in it, he posits that if we don't start to take our yards and turn them into parks for wildlife, we won't survive. The sixth extinction is on its way. And he explains so clearly why we have to stop planting non-natives, invasive species, and why we have to eradicate them. And just his most recent work, which is about oaks, and I'm reading it currently, he talks about how they've done the research now. And in areas that are invaded by invasive species, the caterpillar populations plummet by 96%. And you know what that does to all of the baby birds and all of the other creatures in that food web. So he really has made me aware of the importance of the food web. So when we're talking about composting, this isn't going to be just about how to compost, although at the end, I'll try to tie it up in a bow for everybody who tuned in just for that piece. And we can ask questions, because I certainly made all the mistakes you can make with composting. But it's a much broader presentation than that. And I hope that you'll bear with me. So Nashville actually was pretty impressive when we got here. Things were already cooking, and Mayor Dean was in office, and he appointed the first Green Ribbon Commission. But the report that culminated in all that work, it was about a decade long, said that they wanted to make Nashville the greenest city in the Southeast. And I thought, wow, I want to live here. And when I started reading this document, I thought everything that I believe in is in this document. So that's the basis for where I really began to expand what I consider to be my ministry here at West End. And this is just a little history. So in 2009, we had the Green Ribbon Commission. And then in 2017, the Livable Nashville document was published. That was after a decade, and people were invited to participate. I went to several of those sessions where the city met with people and got ideas. And then in 2018, M&PS won an award for energy savings. And then in 2019, the solid waste plan was passed to be at zero waste by 2050. I thought, boy, we are on the right track. And then in 2020, right away after Mayor Cooper took office, he appointed the Sustainability Advisory Council. And I know Dan's on that, as well as a lot of other very important environmental people. And also in 2020, we had Metro Council commend MNPS because the district announced that it would be moving to a sustainable practice district. And they also passed a proclamation for the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights, which the children at Westmeade wrote. And it's a compilation of about 12 things that they believe that every child should be able to do before they graduate from school. And it's a delightful thing. And I'm going to work with the parks to come up with a way where they can work through it. And when they've worked through all 12 of those items on that list, they can get a Wild Child certificate. Now, it's really important from my point of view to understand that what I've done at Westmeade isn't what I have done at Westmeade. It is really about changing the future by honoring our past. And the woman you see first on the left is Alice Venables. She no longer lives here, but she was with the Westmeade Conservancy. She was the first person who took an interest in what I was doing and offered help. I said, I don't know these plants. I grew up in the desert. And she brought me a botanist, and we went around the campus and identified the plants. And then she introduced me to the man you see at the top of the picture there, Noah Charney. Lo and behold, he graduated from Westmeade and then went on to Harvard to become a forest ecologist. And Noah wrote a little book with his mother, and we use that every year with second grade. It's about growing up in Westmeade and the plants and animals here, and about the importance of creating a corridor for animals to migrate. When he got older, he didn't give up on that idea. He now has established Radnor to River, which is an organization that's trying to acquire property so that we keep old growth forest in a path from all the way from Radnor Lake all the way to the Cumberland River. And then many of you at West End will recognize Sam and Nancy Jones, and I met them at dinner on Wednesday night at church and found out that Sam not only was a Rosarian, but he loved bluebirds. And he and Nancy came and introduced my children to how you can fledge bluebirds, and we've been doing that ever since. And the final picture is Hank Delvin of Delvin Farms. They have a CSA program. Hank was one of the early pioneers in organic farming here. And I can no longer get dirt from him because he does no-till now, which is wonderful, but I miss his soil. The next picture is a picture of the Chew Crew, which helps to demolish invasive species. And the kids got such an exciting time of trying to learn how to command the sheepdogs that manage that crew, and the goats go and they eat down to the nubbins all of the invasive species, and then the people come in behind and plant the natives. On the right, you can see Dr. Hans-Willy Honegger, who is a professor emeritus from Vanderbilt. He single-handedly created the group that saved the Bell Cave and that whole little forested area there, and he takes care of it. He constantly is involved in getting rid of invasive species. And through them, I met Weed Wrangle, and that is a national organization, and they work very hard to eradicate invasive species, and they've been working at Werner Parks diligently to do that. They've created a teaching trail at my school through the old growth forest area for the kids and for neighbors to come and learn about invasive species and how you can eradicate them so that the natives have a chance. So they're on a mission. So that's people from my world who've created what has happened here at Westmeade. And then the next picture is one of my favorite human beings, Colleen Whitmer. And she has a home on Brook Hollow, and she's been rewilding her garden for over a decade now. She shares graciously from her native plants, and she's a compendium of information about native species. And Gail Eichelberger writes Clay and Limestone. It's a blog about native plants. And these people have given more than you can ever imagine to helping the children in my school learn to love nature. And after Seema spoke the other night, I was thinking about my own experiences with my family. And we didn't compost either, Bonnie, but my father would take the slop pail. We raised a pig from the spring through October, and they slaughtered that pig in October. And then the slop went out into the garden. He would just dump it on the garden and sort of cover it up. And that was his composting, I guess. It always was decomposed by the time we planted in the spring, but he did that. But the thing that I was thinking about, how important it is for the younger generations to know that you can take all of the bounty from your garden and all of the bounty from the nearby farms, and you can preserve it. And if you look at those jars of peaches, the only thing that's going to be thrown away is the little lid that seals them. The jars get reused year after year, along with the rings. And the food that's in them, I know who grew it. I know what went on it when it grew, and I know what's in that jar when I eat the food. And the bread on the left is from a friend here who has had the same starter that her grandmother had. And so these are things we need to pass on generationally to children. And the best way to do that I know of is in a school. When I was little in Iowa, which is where I was born, the soil under my bare toes was black, loamy soil. And by the time I was an adult, the soil looked like the picture you see there. One of the greatest resources we had, and our forebears knew this, was the soil. And we have managed in 2 or 3 generations to pretty much destroy it. And without good soil, we won't survive. And of course, we created the conditions that caused the Dust Bowl. So we have to change people's attitudes about what good practices are. And in the next slide, you'll see what the soil looked like when I started gardening at Westmeade. It was dusty, dry, dead, and if it got wet, it was clay. And that was all that was there. And the chemical companies tell us we have to add chemicals to make things grow. We have to add chemicals to keep the pests down. Well, after 2 years of not doing that and adding compost to the soil and getting some soil from Delvin Farms, my soil looked like this. And when I picked it up one day, I had the kids outside, we were talking about what soil is made of, and I picked that soil up and I looked at my hand, and there were little tiny things moving around in there all over. And all of a sudden I realized the soil was alive. It was alive. And I had started with something dead, and now I was husbanding something that was a living being. It changed the way I thought. I want you to see, we're going to click on the Plant a Climate Victory Garden because it goes through basically what's on this slide beautifully in about 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Let me know if y'all can hear. Just give me a thumbs up.
Planting a garden has the power to change the world, and even you can do it. Us gardeners, we do a lot to sustain our gardens. But sustainable, see, that's old news. Because it leaves you in the same damn place. Where a big movement of the gardeners are going right now, they're going regenerative. Because regenerative gardening actually helps reverse climate change by building soil. It's like magic.
During World War II, people started planting home victory gardens to support the war effort. By 1944, nearly half of all fruits and veggies were coming from backyard gardens.
We're bringing victory gardens back, but this time it's for the climate.
Even a small garden has the potential to impact the global crisis of climate change.
Here are 5 ways to make your garden a regenerative climate victory garden. Ditch the chemicals, less disturbance. If you don't want it in your body, don't put it in your food. And stop turning your soil over so much.
2, keep the soil covered. Any plant is better than no plant. They protect and build the soil.
3, encourage biodiversity. Diversity is resilience. It makes America great, so it goes for your garden.
4, grow food. Food from your backyard means way fewer food miles than food shipped all the way to your grocery store.
5, compost. Make it, use it. It's a probiotic regenerative source for your soil.
We can all participate by making climate victory gardens that build soil and helps reverse climate change.
So plant your climate victory garden and add it to this map.
And share your photos of your garden's regenerative practices.
Good soil and sun.
Thanks, Erin. This is a wonderful little video. It only took a minute to watch, but it covers everything that I wanted to say in that slide. And when I found the video, I thought the slide was obsolete. Because first, we want to... There it is. First, we want to think about backyard composting, but not everybody, like Bonnie is pointing out, can backyard compost. So not everyone can do that. Then there's a new initiative afoot here in Nashville called community composting, and Westmeade is going to be a site for this. So it's an experiment that's being funded through a number of folks, and most especially through Kroger. I want to give them a shout out to help people learn to compost. They can learn in a community compost setting, and then if they want to do backyard composting, they can, or they can community compost. And the nice thing about a community compost spot is that you can use the compost from your own waste in your garden. You can take it and use it. It also keeps it local, which was one of the points Seema made so beautifully on Monday. The final thing is, I want to point out that you can take your compost right now to Metro convenience centers. There are compost bins there. You put it in and it's picked up by Compost Nashville and taken to the large industrial composting site out in the Ashland City. So everyone can participate in composting their scraps. You no longer have to throw them into the landfill. The bottom half is to mention for people like Bonnie, you can grow lettuce in a pot. You can grow tomatoes on your back porch. There are a lot of things you can grow even if you don't have a soil. So think about adding those things to your repertoire. And finally, and we're not going to watch this, but that last link is plant a native perennial garden for pollinators. Because as I mentioned earlier, we've got to start creating more space for our wildlife if we want to survive. And this little piece down there, Jeff Berry, who's the CEO of Tennessee Environmental Council, shows you how you can do it very easily. And you can post with them what you've done, as well as going back if you post to the site that was mentioned in the video here, so that people get an idea of how much impact we're all making. One at a time doesn't seem like much, but when we start to see the impact of all of us, it changes our viewpoints. I think too, the next slide is important because we haven't mentioned this, but when we did our first food audit in 2017. It was just me. And of course, it wasn't real accurate because I couldn't do the kind of audit that we did 2 years later with the NRDC and the World Wildlife Fund and Urban Green Lab. But what did come from it was we put all the food that the kids hadn't touched on the stage at the head of the cafeteria. And so after 5 days of untouched food, there was a mountain of milk cartons and oranges and apples and cookies and chips and all kinds of things that were unopened. And the fourth graders came to me that Friday and said, Ms. McIntyre, why can't we just give that to the homeless? And I thought, I don't know. So I began a search, and I discovered, with the support of the food director for Metro Schools, that yes, you can do this, that there are laws that protect you from being sued. And so we began to divert food. Home Depot gave us a refrigerator, which was put in the library. The kids each had a captain for their class, and when their class finished lunch, they would bring the food down and put it in the refrigerator, and then twice a week, I would tote it down to the mission. And when we met in 2019 with folks to do a formal food audit, Jeannie Hunter from the Society of St. Andrew, and a lot of us know about them because we've done potato drops at church or bean drops. She said, you mean you're taking that twice a week in your car down to the, I said, yeah, I don't know anything else to do. It never occurred to me that they not only glean fields, but they glean restaurants, they glean schools, they'll glean food anywhere they can find it and distribute it. So then Society of St. Andrew began picking up my food twice a week. I no longer had to take it down to the mission myself. And in 2.5 years, my little school, which has about 350 kids, donated 10,000 pounds of food to the Nashville mission. So you can imagine what kind of impact that would have if we did it across the district. Doing that across the district will be a monumental lift, I will say, but we can do it, and we should do it. So redirecting food is also an important piece before it goes to compost or to the landfill. The next slide shows, I should have put that up over here so I could see what the next slide shows. Yes, okay. The result of, in 2019, we did the formal food audit, which was amazing. And Urban Green Lab oversaw that. We discovered we wasted 120 pounds of food a day, 1.5 swimming pools of water. And we were stunned. We had no idea it was that much. So we produced about 600 some odd pounds of compostable waste every week. And those are some of my beautiful children. You can see their tray, and the reason I wanted to put the picture in, you see all the plastic on that tray. The kids have to separate their plastic and throw it in the trash. They have to turn their plate over and put that in the compost, and then they stack that tray. The tray is compostable, thanks again to Spencer Taylor, Food Services at Metro. He foresightfully got rid of styrofoam about 9 or 10 years ago, but we haven't been composting until just now that tray. But the trays are compostable, so they turn their tray over, they stack it, and all of that is sorted, and then they leave the cafeteria. And they have, go ahead, you can do the next slide. They have compost captains that oversee and help with that. This picture shows Beetle. He's the guy at Compost Nashville. And they also do, if you don't know this, they run regularly and pick up different, I don't know what their pattern is, but you might be in a neighborhood that they can do this. You can pay them $35 a month. They bring you a clean container, you fill it, they pick it up and take it to the compost. So that's another way you can compost. We discovered through this large composting food audit that we did in 2019, and I was stunned, schools waste $5 million a day in uneaten food. So we really need to be composting that or redirecting it. At the same time, there were a lot of people who were working on these things, and I encountered them all as I worked. And we started to form sort of a network of people. We discovered Nancy Stetton is the gardener you see over on the right. She's at Park Avenue School, and she did all of the work that found this, but there were 66 school gardens in varying stages of school gardenhood in 2017. Some were no longer being used, some were just getting started, some were old gardens that have existed. You can see our garden is in the center there, and the garden you see in the right hand or the left hand corner is Brooklyn Heights Garden. They do a lot of community education and a lot of helping people in a neighborhood that needs food security. So there's a whole range within the schools. And Bell Garden is the Bell Edible Learning Lab, was started about the same time we started our garden. And it's based on the Chez Panisse model out in California. They actually went and saw what Alice Waters was doing out there and brought it back to Nashville. But these are all sort of isolated. So we began to form a network and work on some of these programs because we realized it's not just school gardening. We're talking about climate change, we're talking about sustainability. So we've worked together. And when you think about 95,000 students and employees in metro schools, if metro schools makes a good shift and teaches sustainability, the larger community is impacted quite effectively because those little kids you see picking up trash are self-motivated, and those kids want to compost, they're self-motivated. They go home, and when those parents start throwing good food in the trash can, don't you know, they hear about it. And so those children help move the world. They helped us decide what we were going to do at Westmeade. So it's critical that we get behind these efforts. And we have to, not only those of us who are in environmental organizations, but nonprofits of other ilk and for-profits, leaders need to stand up together and say, we are all behind this and we've got to do it, and we can do it. I want to give a real shout out to Kroger, because without them, none of what's happened at Westmeade would have happened. They sponsored the formal food audit. And when the food audit was finished, there was a small amount of money left. And they agreed to let us use that at Westmeade to continue composting. We were the only school in that group of audited schools that was really ready to do this. We'd been doing the redirection piece, and our kids were ready. They were anxious to do it. So they gave us the money to do that. They funded the community composting initiative that we're working on to start community composting around the city. Kroger has also, and you can see there, they just announced they have rescued 90 million pounds of wholesome food from their stores and kept it from going into the waste and given it. So they've really stepped up their game and are trying to do the right thing. I hope you'll tell them that you appreciate that. And I hope that we can encourage other corporate people to also join in with them and with us. I just couldn't resist these pictures. These are my kids composting. Give 4th grade boys a shovel and some twigs to chop up for the compost pile, and they are in heaven. And the kids, you can see their faces. They're loving every minute of being outdoors and learning to do these things. So when we get the kids, we get the next generation. Grown-ups may not want to do this, but the kids will understand and they will lead the way. We also, and I love this quote, this is from No Child Left in the Wood, is we cannot protect something we do not love. We cannot love what we do not know. We cannot know what we do not see and touch and hear. So our students go 3 times a year, all of them, to Warner Parks for naturalist experiences seasonally. And I've seen it change kids. You know as well as I do, with the pandemic we've been through, that we are calmed by the experiences of being in nature. This is critical work that's going on, and it's important. Okay, this little video is about 6 minutes, but it kind of encompasses everything we've done. And you'll meet my principal at the beginning of the video. Doesn't that look yummy?
Hi, this is Anna, and I'm the Compost and Recycling Education Coordinator at Tennessee Environmental Council. And today we're at Westmeade Elementary School because they have an amazing composting program where they're composting at their lunch period. And we're going to go in and take a look.
My name is Stephen Brees, and I'm the principal at Westmeade Elementary School, and have been here for 15 years. Composting came into effect here at Westmeade. We began with a focus on recycling. Several years ago, we brought in recycling, started with that area. We broadened that into our garden use and brought in gardens. From that, one of the things we started to notice was the amount of waste we were seeing in our cafeteria. And so that brought along the idea to try to bring in food composting here at the building. And that was an idea we started 2 years ago, started exploring the idea. We were able to get funding last year, and we brought it in. We did a pilot for it, and then we launched it at the end of last year and saw the students had an incredible reaction to it, really enjoyed it. Getting a new building and having a building that would be a zero footprint building, it would take a lot of training on the part of our children because we're not taught as a society to be a zero waste society. So the part of throwing paper towels away and overusing paper towels and things like that, that would be a large training project that would have to take place amongst our students and amongst our staff and our community in general that use the facility.
I'm Karen McIntyre, and I'm the librarian, or as they say nowadays, media specialist. We started over a decade ago with a garden. Right away that the children didn't know that food came from a garden. We started teaching them about food and making better choices. In the past 2 years, we've diverted 8,000 pounds of untouched food, mostly to the mission downtown. Now the Society of St. Andrew picks up for us. But then the last piece of that is the compost. And we'd already tried composting in our little compost bin and learned quickly that 100 pounds of compost a day just isn't going to be something we could manage. We'll be able to explain to Metro that if we compost and we recycle and we redirect the good food and we take the things that the teachers ordinarily throw in the trash that are perfectly good, if we do all of that, the actual amount of trash that they have to take to the landfill will be so much reduced that it should equal out the cost. So if we work out all kinks, then it would be easily replicable throughout the district.
If we don't have a planet that we can live on, there's nothing else we can do about it. Captain that tells us what to do, and so we turn over our trays and put our food into the correct bins, like compost and recycling, and then we put our trays in a stack.
Hi, I'm Diane Scher. Support the kids in separating their trash from composting material for food. Karen McIntyre has an amazing program here. It's so progressive, it's so amazing that she's trying to go to a zero footprint school. So I heard that she needed help and I volunteered. Yeah, first of all, what impressed me so much is the kids want to do it. How engaged they are. Some of them, a few of them practically push me over. It's also impressive and dismaying a little bit of how much food is wasted that you can't save. But the food that they put aside and reuse, the other kids know they can come up and get it if they want it, and that's a really good way to save some of the food. And yes, I think we can do this throughout all our schools.
If you figure out all the kids and the people who work for the district and the other workers that are auxiliary, there have got to be at least 30,000 people in this. So if you had 30,000 people who were doing this, it's going to make a big impact. Our ultimate goal is to build a zero footprint or a net zero building for our school. What I see with the children is that these are habits they're developing. They're not going to have to break any horrible habits that, I've had to work at breaking. They're going to come up with the right habit. That if we were to build a net zero building, there would be people who would fund it and who would be eager enough to see this in place as a model for what we can do, that we would find the funding outside of Metro. First step would be to get the blessing of the school district, which we've taken the first tentative steps to do that. And then the next step would be to have the full-throated education program to make people aware of what we're doing. So many people don't know that we've been doing this for a decade, to make them aware that we're doing it and then allow them to participate by contributing.
So that's an encapsulation of everything that we've done here. And Now we're going to go ahead and move on into just the composting piece, because I think a lot of you probably have questions. I don't have answers for everything, but I can tell you what did and didn't work. I want to remind you that there are 3 different things here. The Metro, you can take compost to them and put it in the convenience center. Compost Nashville will come pick up your compost. And it all goes to the compost company, which is the large company out in Ashland City, where there's industrial composting going on. And they can take, for instance, our school compost does have bones and all of that in it. You wouldn't want to put any of that in your bin in your backyard, because it's attractive to other animals that you may not want to attract that closely. But those 3 companies, those 3 groups of people support our composting. So the next slide shows my first experience. And this is our community composting, which is coming, and you're going to be hearing more about this. Our site, we're going to get our bins soon, and we're going to start educating our community, and it'll be limited at first, and hopefully there will be a site close to you. So if you want to try community composting and learn there, you can learn there before you start your own backyard composting. Or you don't have to even start backyard composting. You can just do it at the community compost. Then the next one shows, I would like you all to participate in this. It's just Google Compost Your Compost, join. Every week I post my compost there so that they're keeping track of how much compost is going and being saved from landfills all over Tennessee. And it's really quite impressive. It's the Tennessee Environmental Council promotes this. They also do the site for pollinator gardens, and you can post your pollinator garden there. So I hope you'll do that. The next slide shows the first group of people that made composting at school possible. And the reason you're so important is this concept of volunteerism. I was about to lose the composting program because it was irritating people. You know, the kids have to sort their stuff, and that's irritating. It's not as convenient as if they just go up and toss it all in the trash. So I sent the word out to Gary Bowers at Sierra Club and Paul Slentz at Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light, and several other groups I belong to, Audubon. I said, if you guys don't show up, if I don't have people I can sign up for being in the cafeteria every day at lunch, we are dead in the water and we won't be composting at Westmeade. And that was Friday. And by Monday, I walked in and handed my principal the list of all of the volunteers who were going to be there. And they were faithful volunteers. And this, the 2 ladies in this picture are my 2 favorite. I hate to tell you I have favorites. These are my 2 favorite volunteers. Nancy is wearing the hug sign, and her daughter Carla is wearing the green apron. Carla did the yeoman's work of helping the kids get everything in the right bins. And Nancy, who has early onset Alzheimer's and goes to our Sunny Day Club at West End, Nancy would give hugs to the kids. And I have seen kids go through the line 3 or 4 times just to get hugs. But all these adults in the school, it was good for the adults. They enjoyed it. And it was wonderful for the kids to see those grown-ups who were there to help them and to view grown-ups in a different light. So you need to think about all the ways that you can help this happen in our community. Now, as for your backyard composting, there are some essential things that I learned over time because I failed at them initially. Good aeration. You have to have plenty of air getting to your compost pile. Good moisture. You can't let it dry out. And you got to have equal amounts of brown and green. And by brown, that just means, well, you'll see in a slide, it means all the things that aren't living right now, things that are dead. Boxes, cardboard, paper, leaves. And I don't do my leaves anymore because I've learned from Talamay to leave the leaves alone for the creatures in them. But those things are crucial. If you don't do that, and the final one, turning your compost, is essential. If you don't turn your compost, it takes a very long time for it to compost. Okay. So here's the list. On the left-hand side, you see all the things that are scraps. They're living, they're rich in nitrogen. And on the left, you see all the things that you can put in that are dry. And I shred paper and I shred cardboard before I put it in. The smaller the pieces, we also learned, the better the composting goes, which is why I have the 4th grade boys out there chopping the compost. So those two things, those elements are critical for success. Now, how do you compost? What do you put it in? This was the first bin I tried, and Martha Pilcher and I got them at the same time. I don't know how Martha feels about her earth machine, but I hated it. It was hard to turn. I didn't feel like it got enough oxygen in there. It was, you know, you had to take the lid off to water it. It took a very long time for it to work. So I did not like it, but there may be some people who had no trouble with theirs. I did not like the earth machine. So I gave it up and we moved on to doing it. This is the way we do it at school. I don't have enough sunlight at home to do it in my backyard. So we used pallets, and they're free, and you can build a system like this with your pallets. And it got moved from one stage to the other, but I quickly learned that all the people want to help us. And so they would be coming and they would throw stuff in, you know, the wrong bin. And so that didn't work as well as I would have liked either, because they were constantly gathering twigs on the playground and bringing them down and putting them in the compost. And twigs are very hard to compost. They have to be chopped up. So just a caveat, but if it's your backyard, you can control it better. And this lets you turn it easily. It lets you keep it moist. It lets you control exactly what you've got. And that for me was very helpful. This, however, is if I were going to do it now, this is what I would use. And I've talked to a number of people who've used this successfully. It's inexpensive. It's only $39.98. And you can take it apart when you want to turn your compost, turn the compost, set it up right next to the compost you just turned, and put that compost back in. And a couple of people have told me that this is their favorite method. So this is the one that if I were going to try again at home, this is what I would use. And you can Google YouTube on these, and they're wonderful videos for how to do it. This is the compost system that I settled on for our community composting, because it provides the aeration. It completely controls the spread of the compost around. And I didn't have a thermometer before, but I ordered the thermometer so I can judge the actual temperature of the compost now. And I ordered this super hot compost starter, which is all natural, from Gardener's Supply. And Gardener's Supply, if you don't know them, you should go to their site, because it's a community, it's an employee-owned company. And not only will they have everything you need, but you can talk to real gardeners there who can give you their experience with things. So they've been extremely helpful. So I tend to buy from them a lot. And they suggested using this if I'm going to do community composting to speed up the compost process. So this is all an experiment. It's all something that's in process. So now that is the last slide. And now we can have questions. And I bet probably some of you know more. I think Chris Zinkowitz, you guys have done a lot of experimenting. You would be a person I would consider an expert on composting. So we can share and figure out what you need to know and where you can find the information.
So Karen, I have one question that came in yesterday, actually, from Susan. Susan said that she has a compost pile which decomposes into a beautiful amendment for raised beds, but it never heats up, so she gets a lot of weed seeds. Do you have any tips?
Well, that's why I got that little bag of the compost heater, and it's enzymes and whatnot to increase. If it's your backyard, what I would do, honestly, I'd go over there to Elmington. Is it Elmington Park? Well, it's the park, the agricultural centers there. You know where I'm talking about, off of, it's between Hickory and Harding. If you go on Nolensville Road, and I think it's Elmington Park is what it's called. Does anybody know?
Ellington.
Yes, the agricultural center. They actually put horse manure out, and you can get horse manure for free. And horse manure is great at heating up a compost pile. I do not get it from my school compost, however, but if you have a compost in your backyard, you can, and it's also a wonderful amendment. So you throw that in your compost pile, I guarantee it'll heat it up, and it'll also be good in the compost pile. And I love, Seema talked about, and I didn't know this, about using chicken manure for certain things to make tea. And so there's a whole science relating to that too, but that would be one way, or you could buy that compost starter heater. Okay.
Thank you.
So there was a question from Hannah before the presentation started about any tips on how to initiate a church garden or compost heap.
Well, we had a church garden for a while at West End, and I will tell you the pitfalls. You got to have plenty of volunteers who are willing to do the work. And I want to give a shout out right now. And I didn't get a slide in on these folks, but they are fabulous. They're called the Wild Ones. And it's a nationwide organization. You can belong to the local chapter. They know all about native plantings. They came and rescued me here at school because somebody complained about the way the pollinator garden looked. The plants were too tall, which I just didn't know how to respond to that because, of course, pollinators fly around, so you want the plants up where the pollinators can see them. But they came and they reoriented my garden and changed things around. They have been here working in that garden all winter long, several hours, almost every week. So you got to have a good volunteer corps who are willing to do the work, because the first thing that happens at a church is you get the garden started. That's the easy part. But then you got to keep it watered and you got to keep it weeded. And if you don't have the volunteers to do that, there are going to be a lot of people in your congregation who consider the way things look to be more important than anything else. And so your community beautification committee will be on your back. So I would say the most important two things are to get people excited about it, maybe do some workshops. At West End, one of the things that started was this dinner we had on Wednesday night. Martha Stamps cooked for it, and it was always sustainable food, as much as she could locally source. And I learned to eat a lot of things I'd never thought I would eat, and learned to cook a lot of things I never thought I'd cook from Martha. And Martha was the one who got the garden started. And once you get it started, you got to keep putting in front of people the idea that what we do is we plant for nature. We don't plant for pretty. And what I found with, for instance, when the people were complaining about the pollinator garden, was they wanted a plant and mulch and a plant and mulch and a plant. And they wanted things to flower all the time. And that's not realistic. So a big piece is that education piece. And I don't have a good formula for doing that, because West End no longer has a garden. But Ann Cover, now there's an expert that you could consult on how to do this. Yes, give her your, absolutely. Or the kids do this. We give sparkles to Ann Cover. She would be the one that I would talk to if I wanted to do that in a church. The main thing you got to appeal to in the church is that you are gardening for God. You're not gardening for the people down the street to think well of you. I didn't say that. Okay.
One of the things that helps keep the weeds down is that we use cover crops and then lay that on as a mulch. And so we have, now Betsy Garber would tell you that we do have weeds, but we also, because it's out in the front of the church, you also have to have some sense of the appearance. So we would have wildflower beds specifically, and there were, the way it was planned, there are bushes and small fruit trees in the middle of it, but also the perimeter and the places where that in free wood chips from a tree company that then does not have to pay to put them in the dump. So there are ways that are very sustainable that actually can look pretty nice. So.
Thanks, Anne.
So Shalini asked a few questions. Maybe I'll just list them one by one. And also a few folks have been answering some of these questions as well in the chat. So if anybody hasn't been looking at the chat, feel free if you want some more advice. But the first question was, can we put dog poop in compost?
Most all sites that I've visited, or what I've learned, is that you don't want to put dog or cat manure in your compost. it does degrade naturally. So I'm not sure that, I think it's more a matter of thinking about, does your compost get hot enough to sterilize? Because if it gets hot enough, then it is not important. But if it doesn't get hot enough, you don't want that sort of thing in there, because it's going to have certain bacteria and things in it that you don't want to handle or you don't want on your food. So I think it would depend on the heat of your compost pile, but I just wouldn't do it on practice. I would leave that for nature to take care of. Any other thoughts? Anybody who does put dog poo in theirs?
Well, Shalini also asked, is store-bought bacteria important to put in our compost bins to speed up compost?
I don't know. I've never used it. And the starter that I'm getting isn't bacteria. So I have no idea. That would be something that I could learn from you. Does anybody use that in their compost? My compost decomposes just fine without it, so I haven't used that. The only reason I'm getting the stuff that's supposed to speed it up is because I'm concerned that people, when they bring their compost, are going to want a faster product. My compost takes about a year to fully process, and that may not be fast enough for like a community composting effort. But again, that's going to be an experiment I'll learn as I go.
I think another question from Shalini was, where can we find more information about the community composting?
They haven't done a lot of publishing yet because they've just identified the sites and we're just getting the stuff to get ready. So I would say just keep your eyes open, and I think that there'll be a push. Probably Urban Green Lab will do some publication about this. For me, I'm going to do in my neighborhood, I'll be posting to the neighborhood listservs that we're going to be doing this, and people to participate will have to come for an hour of training. They will have to sign up for a certain job that they're going to do, because it can't be all me. I'm not going to compost everybody's compost. And there are examples. If you Google this, you can find wonderful examples of cities that are doing it successfully. So we're just getting started, and I don't know where all the other sites are. But I also will tell you that we have a MNPS Waste Warrior site, which is, I post a lot of things in there. It's a Facebook group. So those will probably get posted there as well. So just keep your eyes open, but that's coming. It's not here yet.
Harry asked, can you bury food scraps in the earth?
Well, actually, Harry, I know you can, because that's my father's method of composting, was just to bury the food in the garden. He had a big plot that he plowed it, because in those days everybody plowed, but he plowed that plot and it would lie fallow all winter. And during the winter, he would take the food scraps out and just throw them on the garden and bury them into the garden. And that was his method of composting. So yeah, you can.
Paul Slintz said that he loves his backyard compost pile, lots of worms. But do they need to test it for pH or anything to make sure they're feeding it what it needs to be most helpful to our little gardens or new trees?
I just have always assumed, Paul, and in my unscientific self, that nature takes care of that. So I have not worried about that at all. And I will tell you that in using our compost, our gardens are very happy. So I've not tested for any of those things, but I will tell you who does test, and they're really good about helping you. And that's Tennessee State Agriculture Centers that are like they were land grant colleges. So TSU, and they have the extension. If you contact them, I believe you can even take your soil in and they will test it for you and tell you what you need to do. So they're very helpful. And also the master gardeners. And I know Susan Brown is master gardener. That's another group that's very helpful, and will bend over backwards to help you figure things out.
Paul, you can get your soil tested at the Ellington Agricultural Center. You can Google them. They're over off Marchant. There's a soil lab, and you have specific instructions for how to gather your sample, and then you get a report back. And I think it's helpful to get your compost tested, or I take a sample after I've added it to my raised bed and mixed it in with what I have. Then I take that sample, and that can tell you how to adjust it if you need to. I think it's like $15 something.
That's good information. Thank you.
So I do want to name, it is 11 o'clock. So anybody who does need to hop off, feel free. But Karen, there are a couple more questions. Is it okay?
Sure.
Are you interested in staying on a little longer?
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you anyone who has to go. But the next question comes from Hannah, who asked, how big of an issue are herbicides when composting food scraps and putting the finished product on the garden?
I'm not sure what she means. She's worried a bit about the compost having herbicides in it because of what she's putting in. Is that what?
Yeah.
I just avoid. Okay, go ahead.
So I actually talked to the Ashland City Compost Company a while back, and I was telling them, so I want to put it on my vegetable garden, and they told me not to buy from them because Tennessee has a big herbicide issue, and that they couldn't guarantee there wouldn't be herbicides in their compost. So I'm just thinking, like, how big of an issue is that actually? You know, I don't know.
Well, Hannah, I don't get compost from them. But yes, that would be an issue. It's the same reason why you can get free wood chips from the city. But lots of times they chip up stuff that has arsenic in it. And so I usually prefer not to get my wood chips from them. So those are issues. I don't know that they're huge. I mean, when you think about how much those things are present in our environment, and that when they take an Eskimo and test them, that they have those chemicals in their bodies, seems like those are already pretty pervasive. So it depends on how sensitive you are. I think we try to do the best we can to reduce our exposure and reduce the use of all of that. I don't use any of those things. If we have a good balance of nature in our garden, we just don't have the kind of problems that need tending with chemicals. But I don't know that we can guarantee ever. You know, I keep a Berkey water filter in my kitchen because I don't want to drink the tap water, even though it's safe. You know, they have no way to filter out the drugs that get in that. They have no way to test for a lot of things that are in that water. So I think we do the best we can to reduce the possibility, but unless you're making your own compost, you can't guarantee what's in there. And even if you are making your own compost, if you aren't buying all organic fruits and vegetables, your compost is going to have those things in it. So I guess that would be a call that you make based on your own consideration of your health. Not a good answer, Hannah. I'm sorry.
No, that's a good answer. As I continued to research it, people were saying, you know, even if you use bedding or manure from your animals, if you don't make sure that you give them completely organic straw or grain, then, you know, your compost is still going to have those chemicals in it. Now, to what degree the chemicals harm your garden, I don't know. You know, I'm not sure if it actually would hinder the growth of your plants or not, but it's definitely not healthy to eat those things if at all avoidable.
Right. Well, I think you probably are safe as far as the plants will do fine, but we're all contain all of these things already. So it's a matter of how much.
So the next question comes from Shalini, and they asked if we want to get some ideas on doing a community compost at the Richland Farmers Market, who can we reach out for collaboration or ideas?
I would say reach out to Linda Bregan, LindaBregg, I want to say IN. She's the co-leader of the Sustainability Council, and she is one of the people that's been involved in the food waste initiative since the beginning. She's a huge advocate for community compost. She's kind of overseeing these getting started. And I know she was looking for places to do this. Shalini, if you will send me an email, and my email address is just karen.mcintyre, my last name, @mnps.org. I will connect the two of you, and I'm sure she can give you some help. And I love the Richland Farmers Market, and that would be fabulous, because what a great place so many people come to educate them about this. That would be fabulous.
So I was going to leave Betsy's question until the end, but we've got a few more questions. So Betsy asked, where did Karen get her strength and persistence to persevere through all the setbacks and hurdles?
Pioneer stock, Betsy. You know, I think it's that, and we all have this. It's a conviction. You know, I really feel like this is the call of God on my life, to help children experience nature, love nature, and to help, because we're told to take care of the garden, and it's my job to do that. And if I encounter a roadblock, I'll try to find a way to tunnel under it, or go around it, or climb over it. And I mean, I might hit a place where I can't do that, but because of all of the people who have helped, we've been able to do that all along in this process. It has not been easy, but every one of you, probably you can reach up and pat yourself on the back, because in some way you have helped make these things happen. It's not just me. Now, I might be the stubborn dog on a bone, but it's because of you that these things happen in our world.
I knew I should have left that question for the last one. It's such a perfect closer. Trey asked, I see coffee grounds listed to add to compost. Is loose tea fine too?
I think so. Now, I've never had that much loose tea, but I'll tell you, start coffee ground. Coffee grounds is wonderful for your compost. I didn't think about saying that, but be prepared. Coffee grounds are wet and heavy. So when you go at the end of the day to collect them, have something you can carry them in.
Trey, tea is fine, but I actually just put in the whole tea bags, and everything breaks down, even the little paper tag, the string. So tea's fine.
I think our last question of the day, Mary Beth asked, could I put a compost bin in my basement?
Well, that's the strangest question anybody's ever asked. I don't know, Mary Beth. I would think you could if your basement is, but usually the thing with the compost bin is you want it to be exposed to sunlight. So I guess you might have to provide some artificial sunlight for it. I don't know, but I know things will decay, and there are plenty of little microbes and things. You might be the leader of a new movement, Mary Beth. You could do a little experiment and try this in your basement. And if it works, think of all the people who would do it as well. So I say, Mary Beth, go for it.
The reason I'm asking is because I live in a condominium complex, and I can pretty much guarantee that if I had a bin outdoors, that I would get a lot of flack about it, you know. And I've tried bringing it to the convenience center. Convenience center is about 5 miles away. And so it's like I have to, it's not the time involved, but I keep thinking, you know, about carbon footprint, that if I'm driving 5 miles there, driving 5 miles back, you know, every 2 or 3 days, does that really make sense? You know?
Well, yes, and it's also inconvenient because like sometimes I miss the time to get to the convenience center by 15 minutes, and then I'm stuck with that compost for another week. So that's not the best solution. Maybe the best solution for you if you go to a farmer's market. I just think, Selene, that's such a good idea. If farmers markets were locations, just like schools, one of the reasons I propose schools to be locations is that generally they're in neighborhoods. So if you have the community compost sites in those neighborhoods, it'd make it easier for folks like you, Mary Beth, to compost your stuff and not feel guilty about the drive or have to plan I plan my weekend around going to the convenience center with my compost, to be honest with you. You know,
you just gave me an idea, which I'll share, which is that I've kind of made friends with one of the vendors at the farmer's market it's the Donaldson Farmer's Market. I bet I could just give it to them. I wonder if I could just give it to them.
I bet, ask, because you just made me think, and this is the beauty of being together, is that we all think and get ideas from each other. When West End had those dinners and Martha was cooking, she took her compost over to the Caterpillar building because they were composting, and they would compost our compost. We didn't have a compost bin at West End, but she had a bin and she would take the scraps over and they would take her scraps. So that's another thing we need to think about as a possibility to approach some corporations that are doing this, you know, that we could give them compost too. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
I think that is all the questions that we have. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. And thank you all for being with us today and for your questions. I think that Karen might be compiling a list of links, but I also will try to compile a list of links or resources that were mentioned today. And then I will send them out with the recording. So once the recording is done and once we have as many resources as possible gathered, then you will get an email from me. So thank you all again so much. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.